I'm Pam, and I would like to welcome you to the Live Authentically show. My team and I help other people step into their authentic realities, and we do this a number of different ways. This show is one of them. We have a Facebook group of like-minded people committed to spiritual growth and transformation, and you can find us at liveauthentically.today/FB. I also launched my debut book in 2020. It's called SOAR, SOAR, and you can find it on Amazon. And it's a spiritual experiential journey through a transformative event in my life and shows how I partnered with the universe to create my new reality. And I believe that whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever you're struggling with, by partnering with the universe and approaching life with an open mind and an open heart, you can create your new reality and get to a place of soaring. So I'm super excited. We have a great show for you all planned today. I have with me Paul Conti, MD. He's a graduate of Stanford University School of Medicine. He completed his psychiatry training at Stanford and Harvard, where he was appointed chief resident. He then served on the medical faculty at Harvard before moving to Portland, Oregon, and founding a clinic. Dr. Conti serves patients and clients throughout the United States and internationally, including the executive leadership of large corporations. He specializes in complex assessment and problem solving, as well as both health and performance optimization. His most recent book is Trauma, the Invisible Epidemic. So thank you so much for being here, Dr. Conti. I'm super excited to have you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here and I appreciate it.
Yeah, this is going to be an exhilarating conversation. So where I'd like to start is the same place that I start all of my guests, with the question, how do you live authentically every day?
Well, I can tell you how I try, right? It's certainly, as you well know, it's not easy to do, but I think to stay grounded to the basic principles in our lives, it helps us because there's so many stressors that come at us and so many things that demand our time and attention. And often they're things that make us frustrated, right? And can have us look at life through sort of a negative eye or a negative view. And I think remaining grounded to the things that matter to us, like being diligent, doing the right thing, right? Being caring to family and friends, being good at what we set our minds to each day. And I think it gives us a basic grounding that takes some of this seeming complexity of life, which is there, but that's not the root of life. And it can take us back to our principles and our values. And yes, it's going to be a difficult day. There's stressors in all of them, right? But to try and be authentic, I think means being grounded to our principles and being diligent and doing right by others and doing right by what we set out for ourselves in the day, I think is a way of grounding to the basic principles of what it means to be a person in the world authentically. So I try and do that. Don't always succeed, but I try and keep it in mind when the day starts.
I love that. Thank you for sharing.
You're welcome.
I'm super excited to get into, I do a lot of work with executives of large companies. I worked as a pension benefits consulting actuary back in the day. That was my first corporate America. So I worked with senior level executives. So, I know the landscape well, and I'm super excited to talk about that. But what I'd like to do first is hear a little bit more about your journey. How did you discover your passion, your purpose, et cetera? And I'd like to hear your journey from as you stepped into that place of living authentically. Was there a particular moment or epiphany that prompted you to take your life in a new direction? I'd love to hear your journey, because I think sometimes, we have people show up with, as accomplished as you are, this amazing, resume, et cetera. And, I think it's so interesting to hear the story, hear the journey there. So I'd love to have you start and wherever you'd like to and share a little bit about that.
Sure. I mean, what I would say it's absolutely been a process, and it's a process that's still ongoing, and it's a process with a lot of confusion and a lot of tribulation in it. I mean, I think it's easy for any of us to look at the outside at what someone has done or where they've gotten themselves and think, oh, I can see, like, there's a path there that person followed. But I think when you look at our lives, there's confusion and distress along the way, and we have to have it within ourselves to take stock of ourselves and what's really true and authentic for us, right? And to follow that forward, even when it can be daunting. And that was certainly, that has been a big part of my path forward, is at times having difficulty, unknowns, even confusion and tragedy, and then trying to figure out, like, how do I ground myself and move forward? So even going into medicine, happened in the context of having a career in business that I enjoyed, but that wasn't really bringing me this sort of satisfaction that I had wanted. And then having a tragedy in my life that led me to stop and rethink and say, look, if I want to go in a different direction, yeah, I'm taking a chance to do that. Right. I'm stepping away from something that's, it's a good job and you're doing well. And how could you do that? And, there was sort of thoughts in my own head and coming from the outside, and to say, look, if we stay grounded to our basic principles, they will lead us to good places, even though it's hard to find that path. And my path is very circuitous, and there are a lot of setbacks along the way. And I think there's the truth to that's true of most of our paths, right? If we get ourselves somewhere that we feel good about being. So, and a lot of that has come through the lens of real hardship. And as I write about in the book, and I, talk about in my clinical work, is a lot of that comes through the lens of trauma and the lens of tragedy, which can send us in a direction of feeling badly about ourselves and feeling incompetent and incapable and cursed and all of that, right? It can send us in that direction, or we can reground to our principles and say, look, I'm a person who perseveres and strives and does his best, and it's not true that my feelings about myself and what I can be in the world don't have to be changed. And I can go back to the principles. If I'm going to strive as best I can, I don't need to know what the outcome is. Like leaving the business world and going back to college to take pre-med classes. Like I didn't know if that was going to work out, right? But if the next step in front of me seemed to be authentic, to go do that, right? Then it's a chance that's worth taking. And if it doesn't go in the direction we expect, we can learn from that and gain that wisdom and move ourselves forward from there. So maybe it's not the greatest answer in that it's not an exact answer, but it acknowledges that trials and tribulation and confusion, right, along the way to finding good things.
Yeah, I think that's a really insightful and super deep answer. And there's just so much rich content there. I'd like to dive in deeper in a few places. So as you were talking, you're talking about principles, and I found through my journey, I've experienced hardship as well and adversity, and I've had to learn how to transmute that and pivot and move forward. A big piece of this, a big part of my journey has been overhauling my beliefs, right? The story I'm telling myself, right, the beliefs that I embody. Right. So I'm curious I'd like to hear you talk about how your beliefs changed, your personal belief system changed over the course of your journey, and how you adopted a belief system that allows you to embrace uncertainty and allows you to welcome change and no longer fear it the way that you may have in the past.
Well, I was fortunate enough to have a pretty good foundation. I mean, it's much harder if we've had real tribulations in childhood, and I think we as a society must put more time and attention to people who suffered from abuse in childhood or neglect in childhood and are trying to sort of find their way. I mean, it's hard enough with a foundation that doesn't have those things in it. And I was fortunate not to have those things in my past. So I had a strong sense of self, in a sense that I could make my way in the world and I could apply myself to things and make myself matter, right? Make myself matter in the outcome. And then when traumatic things happen to me, as I think they do to all of us throughout life, whether they're like really big things that happen to us, or the weight of acute traumas that can unfold over time, or even vicarious traumas of connecting to other people's tribulations, and it impacts us. Like these things happen to us and they shake our confidence. So when I was working not that long out of college, and my brother lost his life by suicide. So he chose to end his life by suicide, and in the context of that, it then changed the feelings inside of me of feeling like, oh, like what is wrong with me that I didn't know this, I didn't see this, and how incompetent am I, right? And my sense of confidence in myself and my own ability to navigate the world was very much challenged. And that's what trauma does to us. It makes us question our stories of, do we know who we are, right? Or is there a whole bunch of negativity that that seems to tell us like bad lessons, and that we're not going to make it, we're not going to be okay? Does that come to the forefront and begin to really change our belief about who we are? And again, I think that was among the primary points of the book that I wrote, and in the work that I do of trying to take stock of ourselves through the lens of what's really true about us, as opposed to traumatic things happening in our lives and then changing our view of ourselves and even changing our memories, because our memories have meaning through the emotion that's attached to them. So, for example, family memories that were good ones after the loss of my brother, then were changed in a very different way, right? That, oh, like things weren't going to be okay. And like now they seem very negative, and it undercuts a sense of goodness and a sense of capability. And that's a big part of what I had to navigate was holding on to the sense of self that I had before traumatic things happened, so that I didn't lose my way in the negativity that could be created by the trauma, which really comes then through the lens of guilt and shame, that come after traumatic things and can change how we feel about ourselves. So I had to navigate that. Do I still think I'm a person who can make his way in the world and has something to offer and can achieve something for himself and for others, right? Or did the trauma really show that, hey, I wasn't going to be okay, and maybe even was cursed, and they do, like, nothing good is going to happen, and I can't find good things in life. Like I did. So the idea of, is it going to be one view or the other, is really where trauma pushes us. And I was fortunate to have good family and friends around me, and to get some good professional help, and to be able to keep my life on track throughout that big trauma and then subsequent traumas. And I think that's the path we all face. Like they're not smooth paths, and they're not paths of like, oh, we just know that we can go do something and we go and do it. Like we face all the tribulations and the crises of confidence, and so much of that challenge comes through traumatic events in our lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that I'd love to hear you talk about the concept of surrender, just really leaning into surrendering, and knowing that we don't have to have it all figured out right now. I think so many times people think, well, if I'm going to embark on this path, I need to have my course all charted out in advance. And there really is something to be said for really leaning into the journey and focusing on the journey and focusing on
Right.
the moment and allowing it to unfold organically. And I know so many goal-oriented individuals, and I say this with no judgment, obviously. I used to be one of them for years, and I still do have my sights set on certain things, but I'm much more into manifestation now. So manifestation, just allowing the universe to work its magic. Yeah, I can have my sights set on something, but the universe may, course correct, or may point me on a different trajectory. And just being open to that and surrendering to the process and allowing your path to unfold. So I'd love to hear you talk about that a little bit.
Sure. I think that's a very good thing. And I think in order to achieve that, a person, I think, has to have confidence in themselves, right? Because you have to feel like, look, I'm going to be okay. Like, I don't know what the universe is going to bring, right? But like, I'm going to be okay because I'm going to apply myself to it. Right. And the idea of knowing that, like, look, I mean well, and I'm doing my best, and I'm bringing my best to whatever it is that I'm finding in the world around me. And that's got to be enough for me to say, like, I'm going to be okay, whether this day goes like how I want it to, right? Or whether there's surprises and setbacks, I'm going to bring myself to bear, and that's going to mean it's okay. Right. And I think that's what allows us to do that. If we don't feel that, then we want to over control things. Right. And that takes us away from living authentically. Then I start the day off thinking, look, I've got to do this, and this, and it's got to go exactly the way I want it to. Right. Then the first time there's a setback, then I'm mad. Right. And I'm frustrated and I'm upset. And then that changes, the whole feeling state inside, and it raises more anxiety and actually makes it more likely that things will not go well. Right. Or that small things that don't go well will be amplified, right? So if we don't have a sense of confidence in ourselves, then we tend to try and over control, and it raises just lots and lots of negativity in us. So I think there's a point here of being grounded to knowing oneself, and in a very simple way. Like, good mental health is consistent with simple principles, right? Of a person knowing who they are in the world and what they have to bring to bear and what their values are. And then that, in a sense, puts a little bit of armor around us, and we don't have to control life in ways that, look, we just simply can't, right? I mean, the universe is going to bring what it's going to bring no matter what. There's no one who has control even over a couple of hours strung in a row, let alone over days, right? So if that's going to be true, then we want to put ourselves in a place where we have those reserves in us and that sense of self that we can navigate forward. And again, it's traumatic things in our lives that undercut this, right? And again, sometimes they're dramatic traumas, like talking about the loss of a person to suicide. That's a dramatic trauma, right? But they aren't always assaults or deaths or, huge crises in our lives. But sometimes it's just the trauma of, say, being in a situation where a person is undervalued, right? And that could be through the lens of race or religion or sexual orientation or gender, right? There are ways that the world imposes a chronic sense of less than on people, right? And that can get inside of us in a way that we internalize, like, oh yeah, I kind of feel that way about myself too, right? And like, that's not good for us, because then how are we going to feel that sense of strength inside of us? So the idea of looking at what's been traumatic in our lives, whether it seems dramatic or not, right? So what is traumatic often doesn't seem dramatic, right? And how many times have I had a person say, no, there's no trauma in my life, but then they start telling me how, that chronic denigration, right, that they may have experienced in the workplace or in the home environment, is really pervasive through their life, and it's pervasive through their self-talk. Like, what is this person saying to themselves inside, right? And if you start off the day thinking, I'm not good enough, or like nothing's going to go well, it's very hard to feel good about life. It's very hard to face life with the idea that, hey, I'm going to do okay with what the universe brings, right? So I think we need to look at what's going on inside of us that impacts our narrative, right? What do I think about myself? What do I say to myself about myself, right? And this is what can get at the traumas in our lives, whether we know they're there. And a lot of times we know that there's trauma there, but a person isn't looking at it, right? And they feel, oh, I can't look at that because it'll overwhelm me. Or people, I'll start crying and I'll never stop. Or, oh, it can't matter that much. It was years ago. Or, right? There are things we say to ourselves where even if we know there's trauma, we look away from it, right? And often, unless we look inside, there's trauma that's weighing on us that we can really do something about, that we don't even know about unless we put thoughts to it. And again, it's often that chronic trauma of denigration or neglect that could happen anywhere, in home, in the workplace, or in the world around us, that we need to really look at, so we can begin to decide, what do I want my life narrative to be? Right? What's the truth of that? What do I want to be saying to myself? Like I said, no one comes out of the womb being built to say in the beginning of the day, like, oh, I'm not a good, okay person and nothing's going to work out, right? So if we're saying that to ourselves, to look at why, right? Do I really believe that, right? Do I really think that's true? And if I don't, and most of us don't actually think that's true, then why am I saying it to myself, right? Can I look at that, and can I really make change by looking at that? And that's why the message I think that I bring is not one, it's not esoteric, right? It's not an ivory tower, academic message. I mean, academic things can help us further down the path, but it's really a basic message of looking at ourselves and our life narratives and what may have changed us in ways that change those narratives and change the talk inside, so that we can be at our best for ourselves and for the people in the world around us.
And that was one of the areas that I wanted to explore with you, is this whole notion. I think when people hear the word trauma, at least I'll speak for myself, but we think of the dramatic traumas, right? Like you said,
Right.
the death of someone that we know, other dramatic traumas. But what are some other examples of, like you said, the more of the chronic traumas that people could be experiencing, that kind of are that like low simmer, they're kind of aren't aware that they're going on, but really do chip away at, like you said, their confidence, their self-worth, et cetera. So first question is, what are some other examples, like real life, everyday examples of that people could be experiencing? And as a follow-up to that, what is the framework or the process, or how do you get started in identifying and healing those traumas?
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. So trauma in this context, right, is anything that overwhelms our coping skills, right, and then really leaves us changed as we move forward. And again, as you said, it's so much easier to see that if there's an acute event. Like we can imagine how being assaulted or losing someone to suicide, like that's a trauma that overwhelms us and it changes us. But there's also what gets called sometimes the multiple hit hypothesis, where there can be multiple traumas or chronic traumas that weigh on us over time. So, imagine a person who just is different, right, from the majority of the people around them. So maybe they look different, or they're practicing a different religion, or they have a different accent, right? And over time, there's a sense of they're just less valued in society, and they feel that, right, and they get information coming to them that tells them that, right. Then each day there's that added trauma of feeling beleaguered in the world, right? I mean, it's hard enough to make our way when we don't feel that way, right? Let alone being made to feel less than. And we see this around gender identity. We see this around sexuality identity, right? And people who are who they are, and that's wonderful. But if the world is saying that that's not okay, right, then it is very hard to keep a strong sense of self. And this is why some of the deterioration in how we treat each other in society, right, that the sort of viciousness, towards anyone who has any sort of disagreement, right, this is a way that makes people who are trying to make their way in life, right, but are feeling disenfranchised by the systems around us, right, it imposes something that really is traumatic over time and can lead to as much change in the person as that acute and dramatic trauma, right? And we know this because the science tells us this, that this isn't just a platitude, right? Like the science tells us this changes our brains, right? It changes our brain function. It changes us to places of higher vigilance, where instead of seeing someone new and thinking, oh, like, I don't know you, but like, do you have something to offer me, or do I have something to offer you? And I'm looking to see if you're smiling, or if like there's something that could be good between us, right? But trauma changes to seeing everyone in a light that makes more vigilance in us. It's a light of suspicion. Like, are you going to hurt me? Right? Are you going to be negative to me? Right? And like, that's not the way we want to approach novelty in life, right? It's not the way we want to approach new people and new situations, right? So trauma changes our brains. And again, this isn't like the idea, like anything that's negative changes us this way. And like everybody should get an award, and everyone who's not chosen for the team, it's trauma. Like, this isn't that, right? These are big things, whether they're dramatic or it's the weight over time. The idea that if you have a bucket on a scale, you can fill that bucket with water and change the scales, or you can put it in drop by drop by drop and still change the scales, right? So the traumas that impact us, that overwhelm our coping skills, right? They can be dramatic, they can be cumulative, right? They can even be vicarious through other people's experience. But if they change our brains, we're now like the entire profile of how our brains think about ourselves and the world around us and other people is slanted towards the negative. And that changes our mood and our anxiety level and our sleep and our behavioral choices, right? And the dialogue going on inside of us, and we can be dramatically changed. And I see this all the time, where a person says, oh, I'm no different, right? And then I see, wait, that person had a positive view of themselves. They were optimistic about the world. They were like interested. Oh, could there be a better job? They're interested in that. And, there's someone interesting that's paying them attention. They might want to date. They're interested in that, right? But then you see on the other side of trauma, and there's a set of thoughts like, oh, nobody ever likes me. My relationships never work out anyway. And why would I try and get a better job? And, now that person doesn't realize that their optimism, their engagement in life is entirely different without them knowing. And, it's that way that trauma is insidious, and it can be very evil, right? Because it seduces us into thinking, oh, like, not only are you not so great and life isn't so great, but it was always that way. Right. And like, that's not true, right? We've then lost touch to how we have felt differently, and we know better. Right. But that's a very powerful message, especially if the trauma and the guilt and shame that trauma creates in us, when people feel ashamed because someone died. I mean, I felt a sense of shame that I lost my brother to suicide and didn't know. And like, why would that generate shame in a person, right? But that's what the traumas do to us. And then we feel badly about ourselves, and we start making these stories about ourselves through the lens of shame. And that's why we can do ourselves so much good by thinking like, what is going on inside of me? If I'm not feeling so great, right? Is this always how I felt? If my reflex is yes, is that really true? Right? Have things happened in my life that changed how I feel and how I approach the world. And we can do this for others too, right? If I know you, but not that well, and I think, God, you've really been different, over the last several months, can I come and say that, right? In a way that, look, I'm just, you just seem less happy or less engaged, because, we can do this process for ourselves, and we can do it for others. And we can make a lot of good in ourselves simply through the process of reflection, of thinking about it, of writing about it, of talking with somebody we trust about it. And maybe that leads us to professional help, but that's not always the answer. It doesn't have to be the answer, right? Taking stock of what's going on inside of ourselves and others, and reflecting on it, writing about it, talking with people, like we can do that today, right? And we can make life better today by just following those basics of looking at ourselves and others.
Right. Yeah, I love that. I love that. We don't have to be a spiritual awakener or here as a light worker in order to play the role in healing each other. But let's just say that, and I always say any small act of kindness, smiling at a perfect stranger,
Absolutely.
compliment. You never know how just a few words could totally transform someone's day.
Yeah.
But let's just say someone is dealing with trauma that does require professional help. And I assume that whether it's acute, whether it's that dramatic trauma you're talking about, or chronic, it's the treatment may differ. I'm assuming that every situation is different, but is there a way to just give us an idea of the framework? What does that healing framework look like?
Sure. And I can't resist saying this, like a few kind words can really make someone's day, right? It can also make the day of the person who's saying them, right? Because if we are doing something kind or considerate, right, it emphasizes to us, like, I've got it in me to do that. There's goodness in me if I can give some of it away, right? So it's great for the recipient, but it's also could be just as good for the person who's giving, right? So I want to sort of say that. If we find ourselves in places where, like, we see, okay, there's something, like, I've identified something that's going on that's having an impact on me, right? That there, in general, not looking away from it is the first step, right? The idea that I can look at something that's stressful, that I've been really looking away from, pushing to the back burner, and I can think about it, I can talk about it. That's the first aspect of being helped, right? Because no one likes being menaced by something. Right. And if there's trauma in us, we know it's there, but we're looking away from it, then it's always often our peripheral vision kind of menacing us. Right. So the idea that, look, for most of us, there's nothing going on in us that we can't look at. Right. That's a first step. And then looking at that, again, involves putting some words to it, writing some things down. Right. And that can lead us to a helping process. Right. And sometimes that helping process does involve medical things. Like, look, medicines can be very, very helpful to people. And sometimes medicine, say, around anxiety levels, of saying, look, if a person's having panic attacks, it's hard to make our lives better when we're in fear of the next panic attack, right? So even though we tend to overuse medicines and our healthcare system is broken, so we just throw medicines at things when, like, we shouldn't, right? I mean, I think that's indisputable about how our health system works. We use too many medicines for short-term fixes, right? But it doesn't mean there's not a role for medicines at times, right? To improve mood, improve sleep, decrease anxiety. And so medicines can really be very helpful, and they can go along with a process that sometimes is a psychotherapy process, or sometimes is a reflective process, but a helping process that lets us actually make changes in ourselves so that we're not reliant on the medicine forever. Right. Mm-hmm. So the idea is some of us benefit from a little bit of medicine over time, right? Not because we're quote unquote sick, right? But because, like, life is stressful and medicines can help us to some degree. That's true. But it is also true that we tend to over rely on medicines to fix something, right? But then if we don't actually go in and look at what that thing is, the fix doesn't hold. Right. And then we become disappointed and disillusioned. And we have a healthcare system that's into quick fixes and doesn't want to say, look, what may be needed is really talking about something, really exploring something. How did it make me feel, right? What did it change inside of me? Let me think about my life before and after, and how am I handling my life today? Right? Am I grounded to my principles? Am I living authentically? Or am I just hopping out of bed already so stressed about the 50 things I have to do that there's been no ability in me to even take stock of what's authentic in me? Right? So, we can engage in these helping processes, which can come in support groups, in 12-step programs, in therapist offices, in psychiatrist offices, with clergy, right? With friends. There's so many ways that we can do this part that puts words to the helping process that can go along with other aspects that, that can sometimes be medical or medication, but like that's not where the money's at, so to speak. For most of us, it's in the human connection, which again, may be through a professional interaction, but most of the human connection we have is with ourselves and other people in our lives.
I love that. Yeah. It's a very empowering approach, and I believe that, we have what we need within us to heal. Sometimes we do need some assistance in the way of psychotherapy, in the way of, medicine, et cetera. But it's important to, well, if we're on such a regimen, to continue to do the work from the inside out, right? Do the work on ourselves and keep doing that soul work, because that's what's going to be what sustains us, right? And it allows us to navigate life without falling victim to stress and, anxiety, and really becoming disabled because of it. It really can be very, disempowering. And I think, one of the main messages I like to tell people is you have way more power than you're led to believe. We're sort of conditioned to be dependent, right? To look elsewhere for answers. But I always, look within. Like you already have what you need inside of you. You have to know yourself well enough to know when to ask for help, to know when to call in professionals to help you through different, rough patches. But you already have what you need. Lean into that, step into that, tune into that.
Yes.
And I love that you practice, and your practice weaves in that holistic element, that caring for the mind, body, and spirit, the whole person, connecting with yourself and others. That's really beautiful.
I agree so strongly with everything that you said. And look, empowerment is the enemy of trauma. Right. So trauma does not like empowerment. So trauma brings us, and I've seen this consistently throughout 20 years of doing what I do for a living, and the reflections on my own life, just being a person in the world for over half a century now, right? That it is trauma it's the enemy of empowerment. It wants to tell us that we don't have those good resources, right? It kind of moves, imagine like it moves them out of our view. Right. And then when you go to think like I have empowerment, I have the answers within me. Right. Trauma says, no, you don't. The cupboard is bare. Right. And like that's a very powerful lie. It's a very frightening lie. Right. And that's the lie that trauma is telling us, and to think, no, those resources are inside of me and I can go find them. I know that they're inside of me. If I think that I lost them, it's just that they're inside of me and I don't know where to look. Right. Now, how do I ground myself to that again? And it may be this thing that a person loved doing years ago that they stopped doing. And maybe they need to do that again, like, grow a garden again, right? Go volunteer again, show yourself that you have goodness in you. Talk to people around you who care about you, who know the good that's in you, right? Potentially have some psychotherapy to look at what may have happened and what may have changed, right? But the idea is how can we not find our path forward if we can look inside of ourselves and know what's really in us, right? And again, it brings me back to trauma being the enemy of that, because it tells us that lie that says there are no resources inside of ourselves, right? It tells us that the cupboard is bare and we're not going to find what we need. And that is so damaging for us in mind and body, right? This impacts how our immune system works, right? It impacts whether we have heart disease or our predisposition to cancers. Like it doesn't make, it doesn't determine all those things, but it impacts all those things. So it's truly about all aspects of our mind and bodies each day. Right. So it's not pie in the sky, and it's not just platitudes, right? It is real. It's backed up by the science that tells us what trauma does to us, how it makes us forget, how it changes our view of self, how it changes our memories, how it tells us we have nothing when we have way more than nothing inside of us, right? And it doesn't have to be that way, but we do have to look at it because it is very powerful in how it uses guilt and shame to convince us that those lies are true.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. Thank you.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
know we're a little bit over. I promised you would wrap this up in about a half hour, but I'm just so engaged in this. This is just so incredibly just so interesting. I could talk about this all day with you, but wanted to give you a few minutes here to wrap up, and I could kind of give you the stage, and you can talk about whatever you'd like to, your current practice, what you've got coming up in the future, et cetera, and then just some words of wisdom to kind of, to help people where they are right now in their journey. And then lastly, your contact information, if they'd like to get in contact with you directly.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks very much. I think the message that I'm trying to get out there really is contained in the book. And, the book is called Trauma, the Invisible Epidemic. And the idea is to really talk about what trauma is, what it does to us, how we find it in the world around us, how it comes to us and impacts us, how it changes our brains, how it impacts our bodies. And the idea is that I'm trying to communicate through stories. Some of them are my own or stories of other people that I've worked with over the years that try and really illustrate, like, this is what this is like. So it's not meant to be an academic book. It's meant to be a book for anyone to see, look, what might this be and how might this be in my life? And I think the message that I'm trying to get out in the book, which includes how we make ourselves healthier, how all of this is affecting us as individuals and also as societies, which may be small societies in a home or on a street or in an office or in a community, but also the bigger society of the world around us. Like, how are we taking care of ourselves, even taking care of our planet, right? Like, we all have to live here, right? So are we taking care of ourselves has a direct relevance to, are we taking care of the planet we live on? And I think the book is written to be very practical about ways of understanding and then very directly helping ourselves. So I think that's where the message primarily is. If anyone is interested if you're interested in the book, there's a website that's just Dr. Paul Conti. So it's just DR and then my name. So DR Paul Conti, PaulConti. And that's where one would find the book and a little bit more about me. And I think that's what I would most recommend if this raises a thought that, like, what may be in my life or the lives of people around me that's traumatic, that's negatively impacting me. Like, if I understood that better, life could be better. I could make life better. And it's not daunting to do that. Like a resource that can be easy or even at times, hopefully enjoyable to read, that's also really helpful. And I think the book is being helpful to people in that way. I believe that it is, and I'd like for it to continue doing that. So that's what I would say. Thank you.
Amazing. Well, thank you. You're doing some incredible work in the world, and I'm so grateful that you've taken time out of your day to be here with me and with all of our viewers and listeners and impart such deep wisdom and knowledge. So thank you so much. Again, from the bottom of my heart. I'm so grateful to have this time and space with you. And to our viewers and listeners, thank you. I believe that time is a choice, and I'm grateful that you've been here to invest in yourself and your mind, body, and spirit so that you can get to a place of soaring and get to a place where you open yourself up to all of the abundance of the universe. So thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful day. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.